Today, I'm going to talk about the most exciting thing in tech, that thing we all love so much, AI. I hope you all enjoyed the keynote last week where the AI community gave itself the world's largest pat on the back. And I do not blame it, because who's not having fun with AI this year? I know I am. It's completely transformed so much that I do. It's rewiring my whole workflow. Here's a little hot one. I will just walk and ramble into a tape recorder, and then I will transcribe it and have a GPT, do some cool stuff with it. It's great. I love it. But, many people do have an intuition that crypto has something to offer the AI boom, right? Like we're like, oh, well, it hallucinates though, and we need veracity or something, there's it's got something to offer here. Okay. Well, I'll talk a little bit about two problems in AI today. And then I'm going to talk about how those two problems in AI are entrenched, basically unavoidable in the current programming paradigms. And I'm going to talk about how we've been building solutions to those. And those points that I'm going to make are subtle, and I hope I do them justice. And it's going to go by in a blink of an eye, and I hope I make my point with you. I'm pretty excited about it, though. And then I'll have a little conclusion. Okay, so I said there's two problems in AI today. I'll frame them as safety and monopoly. So safety, usually when people talk about that, they're talking about alignment, right? And then I'm going to talk about something completely different. So alignment, not talking about it. In fact, arguably, I think it might not be possible. That's just my take, and actually it's irrelevant to this talk. But the confused deputy, this is a problem you might not have heard of before. It's a computer science problem that involves having an agent that you want to behave on your behalf. And there's some subtle problems with when you give it authority. So one example of a high-level example, imagine a Jedi tricking the door guy, says, you will let me in, and the door guy, he controls the door. So he says, oh, I'll let you in, okay. And then, Jabba says, you weak-minded fool. So what I would say is, one way to think of this is we don't need stronger-minded fools. We just need locks. Okay, well, I'll give a better example of this. So we need to separate the identity verification layer, the doorman. You don't want a doorman that just is like sizing people up and then letting them in. You want an authorization system that's secure in spite of that. So another way to put that, no matter how much you dress like Batman, if you don't have his Bat garage door opener, thank you, Midjourney, you can't get in the Bat cave. Okay. So the confused deputy problem was articulated by Norm Hardy in 1988, and he was suspended this year. He didn't die. I'm giving him the respect to say he's suspended and he'll come back. He was the first person to be suspended under a new California law. Okay, so I'm going to give an example of a confused therapist. So let's say your therapist wants to talk to permission to your LLM. And then to get access to your therapy history. So yeah, this is an example of the problem happening. They want access to your therapy history. So the LLM needs your diary, right? So, okay, very basic thing. And then meanwhile, the coffee shop wants to talk to your LLM also, and it wants to know your coffee history. Okay, so you've got your LLM, you've got a therapist with your diary, got a coffee shop with your coffee history, okay? Got one agent, two different security modes that it needs to respect, okay? That's the scenario. How would you implement this? If you're watching this on video, please pause and take the time to complete the exercise on your own. But for you guys, the coffee shop is now going to ask a question about your diary. Does it gain access to your diary? That's the test case. And I bet you if you paused here, your naive implementation gave access to your diary. And that's because you implemented an access control list, which is the way that everybody writes their authority systems today. And it's not because it's wrong to, it's because it's the only practical way to. It's actually hard. You'd need something else. So let's take it a step further. What if your diary is larger than the LLM's context window? Can you also, this is another test case, can you selectively expose that access? So kind of a LLM plugin. Okay, second problem in AI today, monopoly. OpenAI has just got the best one, right? Okay, Claude's pretty good if you need a long context window, but it's not very creative. It's a little rigid. How are we going to prevent this monopoly? Are we all just going to hand it everything? I mean, I think a lot of us are ready to, right? OpenAI is on track to eat the world. Let's talk about it. They just announced GPTs. So you can hand train, just shovel it, all of your expertise, and they will create specialized AI assistants hosted by OpenAI. And of course, the content that the AIs have already scraped might be a lost cost for intellectual property. So let's move on from that. And they said they'll have a revenue share model. Isn't that great, guys? From Sam Altman. We're going to start with the sharing part of the ChatGPT subscription revenue overall. There will be a tier based on how many active users. I expect that to evolve a lot. What does this sound like to you? Does it sound like YouTube creator economy a little bit? Like, I hope you look forward to hoping you have enough. Or maybe it'll be like Netflix, where you don't even know how successful you are. And so you have no negotiating power whatsoever. It might be something like that. Maybe they'll be nicer. I don't know. But that's the negotiating power they have. Maybe it'll be like Amazon. And if you do too good, they'll just cut you out, because that's how much negotiating power you have with OpenAI right now. Okay, so how would you establish a better negotiating position with an AI provider that just has the best model right now, and to prevent them from being able to just alter the deal? Okay, so I'm going to argue that these problems are entrenched in the way that we're programming today. I don't blame OpenAI, okay? I'm saying that it's easy to build a store on top of a service. You got a service, build a store, right? It's profitable. Everybody wants it. It's going to be fun, right? Okay. And also, arguably, OpenAI would be in violation of their fiduciary duties to not do it at this point. So you could maybe argue it would be illegal for them to not monopolize AI right now. Okay, so if that's the case, then what we might say is that in order for it to be legal to not monopolize AI, then it needs to be easy and still profitable to build in a collaborative, anti-monopolistic way. So over at MetaMask, we've been doing some research onto problems like this. What do you know when we are dealing with people interacting with websites that might not be trustworthy? We deal with allowances. When we involve installing snaps and plugins, if you've learned about our plugin system, there's a permission system there too. And so we've actually been thinking for a long time about multi-agent coordination of permissions. And I'm not claiming that the Snap system as it currently exists implements these solutions, but it at least has led to the research that is paving the way for this. Okay, so I'm going to present a couple solutions. So the first one I'm going to call self-custodial AI, APIs. I think this is a new term. I'm coining it. And then a distributed reference passing as authorization, and I'll get to that. So self-custodial APIs is that thing where MetaMask has Infura, but you can swap it out. And so the website doesn't care what API source you have. And so the user has the service. So it's a user custodial API. And so that gives you this thing where you're like, okay, Infura is centralized or whatever, but it's good enough for now. And when I freak out that they're being bad about privacy, I switch. And because I can, because it was in my hands all along. And the websites keep on working because it was all designed for user optionality the entire time. And we can do that not just with Infura. You can do that with LLMs. I don't know if you've seen, but Alex Atala, an OpenSea founder, he created this project called the Window AI. And it's basically this, MetaMask for AI type product. It's one of those LLM libraries. And so then every website can access it. My critique is that it still specifies which AI you want to talk to. So I think it's important you abstract away who is providing the LLM so that you can trade out whether it's OpenAI or Claude or a self-hosted AI. But once you do that, if you have an abstracted AI agent you take to sites, you now have this credible exit. Okay, so that's part one of my proposed solution. So MetaMask snaps are one way to experiment with having a self-custodial API, which could be an AI. I have one, for example, if you want to fork it and play with doing it yourself at GitHub/me and friend. And then here's the meaty part. Here's the part I've been kind of dreading because there's subtlety and nuance to it. And if you blink at the wrong slide, you won't get it. And I hope you rewatch later in slow motion. So for confinement of AIs, we want to keep them confined, but we want to keep them empowered. And we want that empowerment to be flexible. Then we also want it for anti-monopoly purposes. I'm going to use two examples, and that's why this is ambitious. So today it's easy to be bad about confinement, and we can make it easier to be good. It's easy to be bad because if you had a self-custodial information and a self-custodial AI, and you wanted to connect them to third parties selectively, how would you do it? So the dominant paradigm is with ACLs, and you would do something like provide a request, ask a question, what scares you the most, and then the second parameter there is what context you need. So here it's therapy journal. So here's how the barista is stealing your therapy, because your AI now has to keep track of permissions itself. If you wanted to not hand your journal over, it now, you're like, you had a permission system, and now each thing has to have a permission system. And honestly, even if it does, now if a website that it interacts with is interacting on behalf of multiple agents, it then also gets confused. So it's this fundamental thing with access control lists. If you're balancing permissions on behalf of more than one other agent, you can lose control of them. And I really recommend checking out the Norm Hardy example, although I'm trying to give you a more accessible example. So if the AI is getting the permissions, then ensuring it assigns the appropriate permissions requires each agent to implement its own kernel. And even if each agent implements its own kernel, it'll fail to distinguish between permissions acting with the same account. That's the subtle one. I don't blame you if that doesn't totally make sense right now. But in particular, what it means is you can't do a multi-hop delegation. So if your therapist journal wants to give limited access to your journal to a second AI agent that it works with, it really can't. It needs to ask you to grant it full authority again, or it's at risk of slipping out everything it knows. Okay, but we can make it easier to be good. The answer is really simple. It's just the capability model. Permissions need to be first-class objects, as in function references. So if you have done JavaScript, you're actually familiar with functions as first-class objects. We mean the function can be passed as a parameter to other functions. That's actually a really profound thing. And it sounds like a checkbox on a language feature list, but it's profound. It's so profound that what if our spoken language had first-class functions? What would that mean? It would mean when you're talking to someone, you can make up a new word that only they can use that gets you to do something you promised to do. So a little bit like a safe word, but no one can overhear it. And when they use it, nobody learns it. Dynamic new words, right? We can't do it in a spoken word. So in a spoken way. So this is really a way that we're using computers to expand our capacity to make agreements with language. So I think it's a pretty cool thing that we can do with computers. So in this scenario, you would just say AI ask questions, prompt, and then you would pass it your reference to the diary. And by doing that, it now has your diary in context of this request. And so it's virtually impossible for it to mix it up with other context. It's in the scope of that question. So it just makes it easier. It actually makes it hard to write the vulnerable version of the code. So yes, the AI is still getting access to the diary, but it would be hard to accidentally expose it to a different context that it didn't get. And also multi-hop delegation is now trivially easy. So if you have a reference, you can just pass it to some other process if it needs it. So you can now orchestrate arbitrarily complex networks of computation where each hop can actually be attenuated delegation. You can say, oh, for you, for the next 5 seconds, for you, 3 calls, for you, a token limit. And so you can practice the principle of least authority, everything getting the ultimately constrained authority while getting authority spread widely enough to do really creative things and not accidentally creating security vulnerabilities. And this just depends on a distributed object pointer system with a way to unwrap and reconcile these function identities. And object identity is a pretty solved problem. Pointers are a pretty solved problem. This just means a distributed version of that. And so that's actually something we call the Capability Transport Protocol, or CAPTP. And we've been working with our friends at Agoric and Sprightly on specifying that. And so it's a real protocol that we're building. Now for anti-monopoly, I know I maybe overpacked this, I'm sorry, but I think these two cases are both important. So how do we keep them from being anti-monopolists? I said user custodial, but also, how are you going to get paid? It's so easy for them to make a store and for you to just beg for your commission, right? So today it's easy to be bad. We can make it easier to be good. It's easy to be bad because they've got the billing info and you'd have to subscribe to services. And what is a user custodial agent? And you don't want to paste your OpenAI key around. That'd be unreasonable. Okay, so what would be the object capability version of this? Okay, so every permission is just a function anyways, and they can be wrapped, including commissions. So if you can make commissions as a parameter to a function, and if there's a way to pay for a function via a parameter, then you can just wrap that and add a commission to it. So let's see what that might look like. You might have an LLM question service where someone can ask you a question, give you some context, and a payment. Okay, this would be a very simple, standardized interface. But then you might want to add a commission on top. So you would write a wrapper on it. So in this case, you've got a factory function on the outside on line 2. It creates the service. In this one, you give it your old question service. You say, hey, user, give me your question service, and then I will return you a new question service. So my new one, it's got the same interface. You give me a question and a payment. Oh, I forgot the context. And then internally, first I pay myself, and then I give your question here, but with my movie context. So now my sweet movie recommendation service is able to operate, and I can keep my brilliant movie secret sauce to myself. Now, eventually you might want to put your movie recommendations in the open domain, make it a public good or whatever. But this is really concerned with if you're trying to monetize your expertise, which is what the GPT's model is about right now. Okay, so basically, yeah, like I said, being able to make up a new word on the fly is basically magic. It's like a magic spell. It's like if at Hogwarts you didn't have to practice each spell. It's like somebody could just hand you a new spell. Oh, and they could sometimes wrap a bunch of spells into one spell just to, Harry, you're going to need all of my spells. Boom. And you're just like, done. Basically magic. Okay, so the question service could be metered. You could, do whatever you want to make it. And then you could also host these in other ways. You could build your own GPT assembly type website, similar to what OpenAI is doing. And there could be actually competition for the best AI agent construction thing. And, the question is, could you make it even more pleasant? So the resulting service would let anyone with a self-custodial LLM establish a connection with your service that then they pay for in the same way that they pay for their main LLM. So you can you swap in a new paid service. So it shouldn't have to introduce a new billing system for them. You should actually be able to just move around the web and people could get paid micropayments for whatever they're contributing to the graph of capabilities. Okay. So, you could get paid explicitly or whatever. So it could be more concrete and explicit than YouTube, right? So I'm going through those 3 earlier examples. So now you've got that explicit thing that YouTube doesn't have. And then the usage is transparent, which is the thing Netflix doesn't have. That also the expertise is now private to the providers. So you're now making it resistant to that Amazon generics attack or that thing where OpenAI decides to compete with you with your own product kind of thing. So this only applies to private intellectual property. I mentioned that. But once it's out, it's a public good. So sorry about your art. There's a hot take. It's kind of a public good at that point. Okay, so conclusion, wrapping it all up. I know that was a lot. Language security argument. I think really, if we have language level security, we can do a lot of really fantastic things. We spend a lot of time talking about scalability and other properties of languages. But I really think if we had the language ends up confining the expressiveness of our agreements. And if we can have a language that allows us to basically pass around our abilities like magic spells, I think that it's going to have the most kind of economic benefit for us of the kinds of things we could expect from a computing paradigm. My argument is the easiest way to win confinement and anti-monopoly is by making the laziest option the most collaborative and profitable option. And I think we have a path to do that. At MetaMask, we are laying foundations for this, both internally and via our grants DAO to Agoric and Sprightly. We're working on making this capability transport protocol. There's 2 versions of it right now. There's JavaScript to JavaScript, and then there's Sprightly's. It's like a Lisp to itself, but we're working on bridging them and eventually bridging it to more languages. So eventually these function pointers should be able to be very cross-platform. That's the ambition. And there shouldn't be a strong reason that they can't go to blockchains as well, just as long as they can have a bidirectional message passer. So Sprightly is a nonprofit corporation. You can donate tax deductibly to them, and they reluctantly tax crypto. So if you want to annoy them and troll some reluctant crypto users, donate to this nonprofit. I'll just quote Mark Miller from Agoric. He says, "Don't legislate what you can innovate." I think a lot of people are taking a lot of haphazard approaches to AI today, and a lot of them are kind of moonshots that like legislation or maybe somebody's going to kick you back for your intellectual property for the art that you posted 10 years ago. I don't know if that's where you want to spend your energy, but I think that we can make the collaborative, profitable option the easy option. And so might as well try. And so sorry about your previous stuff. You might want to be more selective about what you choose to make public if you want to profit from it. That's my little take on intellectual property. In summary, treating authority as a key instead of an identity check eliminates a category of confused deputies, which LLMs seem eager to be. Oh man, how many conclusion points did I come up with? I was clearly excited about this talk. I'm sorry. We don't have to. Let your services be composable into new creations and you'll get paid more anyways. And good closing line. Fuck alignment, we've got confinement. Thank you, everybody.
Any questions, guys?
Yeah. Any questions? Perfect. Any question there? Okay, cool.
So it's a very short question. Is this presentation was built with ChatGPT?
Well, okay, so I wrote the slide generator. So this is my slide generator I wrote for Rome. And I added image support with ChatGPT right before this. So a little bit. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, I gave it that much. Because I mean, why would I hand code that, right? I got one example. I was like, slides.js, this is how you do images. This is how Rome works. Didn't even proofread it. It worked. I love it. I'm a huge fan of the AI. Like, I hope the hatred for the monopoly and dangers doesn't shadow my love for the potential here. I think that it could really free us up to do what we do best, right? Share your expertise once and then let people have conversations with your expertise. I think that's a beautiful thing. Any other questions? How can you follow the development of CapTP? The Sprightly group has a GitHub repo called Okappen, as in Okappen my Kappen. It's a funny little pun. Basically, if you follow the Sprightly Foundation blog, or if you look at their GitHub, you'll find Okappen. That's the one that is cross-environment. So I think that that's the one that is going to be like the really big unlock for cross-environment stuff. I mentioned that it should be possible to bridge this to blockchains. One example is if you've looked at the Optics bridge. The Optics bridge is a good example of a bridge that's just a message passing mechanism. So it would totally be friendly for this. So you could make Solidity contracts that just say like, here, you can take this reference outside. And now there's like an account that's authorized to call the function. And so now you could have a computer that can pass function references around. So you can absolutely bridge this. And I think that's pretty cool.
Hi. My question is similarly, now we have the mobile era, web era. So do you think depths of Web3 will be the GPTs, agents of marketplace on the in the future? How do you think, or it is a separate marketplace as a Web3 have, or in the GPT will on GPT we integrate those things?
So I kind of showed pseudocode here. So I'm not trying to be too prescriptive about how we build it. I'm kind of showing that lexically, if you have pointers, basically if you have capabilities and you can pass them as arguments, then you can compose competitive AI services. That's a general statement that could apply to probably any blockchain or any digital payment system. I gave JavaScript examples because I think it's easy to read. That's probably my web developer bias. But yeah, what will it look like? I mean, I don't think there's any reason we can't build something like that. But yeah, it's going to take some experimentation. Part of why I like MetaMask Snaps. It's a great place for experimenting with kind of weird stuff like this. And we plan to.
I was wondering what MetaMask thinks about intents and how they can be used with LLMs to better the UX.
Yeah, so intents are a category of transaction where you express an intended outcome. We've been working on a category that's basically called capabilities, and actually I gave good examples of it here. I think capabilities are somewhat more generic than intents, and so you can express an intent as a capability. It would be basically after the execution, you do some checks to make sure it happened like you wanted. But in general, being able to put something out there where you say, I accept that someone else can do something within some bounds on my behalf. That fits very well within the capability model. And I think that the intent model is kind of like people, thinking about transactions, wanting them to be a little bit more declarative. And so they're kind of creating this space in that spectrum. But I think that this model is basically more general purpose. And so it can be used for those things, but I think it's even more flexible. It can do things like session keys as well as intents.